good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our kickoff engagement session for next
Back
year's
and
NOFA.
forth. If you'd rather watch something else, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, thanks for joining us today for our kickoff engagement session for next year's NOFA and related program updates. If you're just joining us, please feel free to put your name and organization in the chat. If you don't already know me, I'm Jessica McKinnon. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst here at OHCS. I'm joined today by Talia Concravis, our Assistant Director of Homeownership Services, who will be monitoring the chat and helping me respond to any hard questions. You might also see Susie Sandstrom and Elizabeth Thomas, our development officers in this meeting, Matt Rosen, who is our Program and Policy Analyst, Tasha Worth, who is joining us to work on OHTC for homeownership, and others possibly joining us from OHCS. So before I jump in, just a bit of housekeeping. This meeting will be recorded and we will post the recording online in the next few days. Please stay on mute during the presentation portion of the meeting. There are a lot of people on this call today, so also please raise your virtual hand to speak, or feel free to enter your questions or thoughts into the chat at any time. And here's the agenda for today. First, we'll give a brief introduction to LIFT, then we'll dive right into our proposed changes and some early NOFA related questions. Both of those sections are also discussions, so we'll pause several times to get your feedback, and then we'll close out with a few links and reminders. Just to let you all know in advance, we are taking your feedback and comments at this meeting, but we'll also be accepting emails and giving you a link to a survey in case you don't feel comfortable speaking in front of others or need some time to think on things. And I wanted to start this presentation with a quick introduction to LIFT. I know many of you have been deep in LIFT and LIFT-related things for a while, but I also wanted to make sure that if you were new to LIFT or you just haven't thought about it in a couple of years, that you had kind of a good baseline to start from. So LIFT is one of OHCS's most consistent funding sources. It stands for Local Innovation and Fast Track and is funded through Article 11Q capital bonds. If you're not familiar with those, capital bonds are issued to the state to allow us to invest in things owned or controlled by the state. Typically, that's for things like highways or bridges or the Capitol building, but it could also mean housing, so long as there's some kind of operational control. This program supports both rental and homeownership development. This is for the homeownership section. The requirements are pretty straightforward on the rental side, but they can be a little challenging where the homeowner should have full control of their homes. Because of this, there have been and still are some specific requirements that have been challenging to navigate for a lot of developers. We're hopeful that today's proposal could possibly get past some of them and make the program a little more accessible. So who's eligible for LIFT funding? This requirement remains unchanged from previous years. We're able to serve organizations that qualify as eligible covenant holders under statute, which I've included here on the slide. Mainly, we're able to work with nonprofit organizations under item C here, but we're also able to partner with certain types of co-ops, public agencies, and federally recognized tribes. We're not able to fund for-profit organizations through LIFT. And eligible developers will be able to apply for LIFT to cover new construction of affordable homes, conversion of non-housing structures into affordable homes, and new manufactured home parks. Essentially, we're focusing on net new housing or bringing housing units where there were none before. Because Article 11Q requires the operational control of the units, projects must use some form of shared equity model where the home buyer will fully own the unit or structure, and the organization will maintain ownership of the land. Most of our partners use a community land trust model, but this could also work for things like leasehold condos, mobile home parks, and co-ops. Of course, we recognize that many affordable housing developers don't have the capacity to also become a CLT and manage property. So we are developing a process and documents to allow for a transition of the property's loan and responsibilities from an eligible developer to an eligible CLT. So we would welcome applications from a partnership between a developer and CLT. The next item is that LIFT funds can only support homes for buyers earning less than 80% AMI. This is something that's written into statutes, and the funds can only be spent on capitalized construction costs. So things like site work, walls, siding, counters, etc., are the most clear, but also some professional costs. This is a restriction of the bond, and we'll be working on adding that eligible expenses policy to a manual that we hope to present to you in October. And then the last item is just that the project must not have begun vertical construction. Now I'd like to pause just for a second and see if there are any questions about these sorts of fundamentals about LIFT before I really dive into the meat of the presentation.
Jessica, I don't see any questions, so I think we can keep
Okay,
going.
good.
But feel free to put questions in the chat.
Yeah, please do. All right, then moving on. Great. All right, then I'll go ahead and get started on our proposed changes and discussion questions. And I do need to start this section with a quick disclaimer. We're going to make a couple of pretty substantial proposals today, and we need to make it clear that those are not yet solid and approved. We're hopeful that these ideas will come to fruition, but we're still finalizing our research and internal processes to determine if they are actually possible. So the presentation today is focused mainly on getting your feedback for these ideas, and a final solidified plan should come out later this year, along with the NOFA. All right, so I'm sure the big question everyone's asking is how much lift can you get? You may be familiar with previous lift offerings that limited the award to the lesser of the appraised value of the land plus infrastructure, or $200,000 per unit. This was a pretty inflexible rule for lift. This has worked well for some projects, but it has been a limiting factor for others. Specifically, this didn't work well for rural developments where the value of the land was much lower, even though construction costs stayed the same. It also didn't work well for denser or stacked developments where more units and construction costs were placed on less land. So we've been working with the Department of Justice and several partners in our LIFT working group to figure out how that can possibly be changed. And we're proposing the following possible changes. So if we are able to move forward with this plan, we'd like to change LIFT to be awarded as a per unit subsidy. That means that it wouldn't be reliant on land value at all and would instead be awarded based on the number of bedrooms and the AMI served for each unit. We're proposing the amounts shown here in this table. So for a project serving up to 80% AMI, we would start at $165,000 for a studio unit and increase by $10,000 for the first 2 bedrooms. Then we would increase the award by $20,000 per bedroom for 3 bedrooms and beyond. If you'd like to serve households earning less than 60% AMI, we would add an additional $10,000 per bedroom for each unit. The goal here is to substantially fill the gap between the cost of construction and the affordable sales price. And based on our previous application, these amounts do appear to be about the right size. We want to make sure that we do substantially cover those costs, but we also provide that larger jump for more bedrooms to incentivize those family-sized homes, which has been a goal of LIFT since its inception. All applicants would be eligible for the full amount of that development qualifies for, as long as their net profits do not exceed 10%. Otherwise, we'd want to either provide less funding or see you reduce your sales price. So that proposed change is our first really big discussion topic today. We have a few questions for you here on the slide. First, are these subsidies the right size? Second, should we provide a higher reward to rural developments? And if so, how much higher? Then the next questions are a little deeper. First, LIFT is provided as a loan that would be satisfied through the affordability period. Historically, keeping the loan at the value of the land meant that the loan and asset value were kind of a wash, so it didn't really count as debt in most folks' financials. If we move to awarding beyond the value of the land, do you foresee any issues with your future audits and financials? And then the last one is that we've historically only restricted units to 80% AMI. If we award higher amounts for 60% AMI, we would want to document that as well. So a full 80% AMI project or a full 60% AMI project are kind of straightforward, but we're still trying to figure out how we can do this restriction for developments that provide a mix of 80% and 60% AMI, given that different projects will be in different phases. In a perfect world, we would know exactly which lots and addresses would be 60% and which would be 80. But at the time of closing, sometimes the lot lines aren't even finalized. Other times partners will select their buyers before setting the AMI targets. So they may end up with more or fewer buyers under 60% than they'd anticipated. So given these variations, we were hoping to hear a little bit about how your organization might best be held accountable with the 60% AMI units. So with that, I'll go ahead and open it up to anyone who'd like to provide feedback or any one of these questions.
Hi, Jessica. This is Amy Warren.
Hi, Amy.
Hi. I'm happy to provide some feedback on the rural piece because our organization does both rural and non-rural development. I think if the same subsidy goes to both, it's been a poor financial decision for us to go with the rural. It is more financially advantageous and easier to put together a pro forma for non-rural still. So if an organization does only rural, then the choice isn't there. But if the choice is there, I can see the choice being for non-rural if they're the same.
Do you have any estimates for how much higher you'd want to see for a rural development?
Well, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing here for rural development. I would say maybe this is good for rural development from our perspective. What it would allow us to do in non-rural development is do some of the really awesome energy upgrades that, like full solar, net zero, going more towards passive and carbon neutral housing, that kind of stuff. So it would be more of an upgrade at this subsidy per door in our non-rural, whereas the rural, it would just make it pencil.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica, I'll chime in, and as I think we do limited equity co-ops, and for us, I think this works very well. The only question I have is the $10,000 difference between 60 and 80%, and I'd have to look at the numbers to see if that makes sense. Because basically that would mean that's less subsidy for the 80%. So it's just a question of whether or not the additional income that the 80% would provide would make up $10,000. And I don't have an answer for that. So I don't know if that's something you've done a deep dive on, that you feel pretty good about that figure.
We have done a little bit of calculations on it, but y'all are the ones who are boots on the ground and have that real solid experience on if this works. So if you think, or if you have any concerns about that, happy to hear it. But yeah, we have done a little bit of research on it, but happy to talk further about it as well.
Yeah, we'll just have to run the numbers and see if it works, but otherwise I think it looks great.
Great, thank you. So I see 3 hands, and Teams fortunately orders them for me. So I will hand it over to Amber to make her comments.
I am from Grants Pass, and we have a pretty low income limit, income level. And for me, looking at this, I'm seeing that, like you said, cost to build is relatively the same between rural and non-rural, but land acquisition is different, but also the income differential between that, what is 60% in our income to what the home purchase price is going to be is much larger for our low income communities as well. So that might be something to consider. I know it would be a lot more complicated to consider. But a lot of organizations, big organizations, have the freedom to develop in Portland and in Grants Pass and in Klamath Valley, but they're going to have to take the best deal. And that's going to exclude us.
It's really helpful. Thank you. Shannon, I see you're next. Shannon, if you're speaking now, you're still on mute. Talia, are you able to unmute Shannon?
I just tried. I am not able, so maybe I can work on that and we can move to Carl, who's next in line.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, many thanks to you guys. I know it's been a major labor this year. So Jessica, Talia, rest of the crew, thank you so much. This is fantastic. I'm really super psyched to see this. Just looking at performers that we're working on right now, literally today, it looks like those subsidy limits, the new subsidy limits, per unit subsidy limits, will work great. So I'm very, very happy to see those. Thank you for doing that. A couple of probably have 2 or 3 things. I don't know if you want to click them all off right now, but a couple of things in particular. So I would imagine that the total amount of subsidy requested as a result of having higher per unit maximums would increase, or you might have more overall demand. Is there a sort of correlation with the total amount that's available for 2025? In other words, would the total amount you have to dole out increase, or does it remain the same? Is there some impact that you're thinking about in terms of the number of units you can produce?
Unfortunately, for 2025, we're not able to adjust how much funding will be on offer, just because that's already been decided by the legislature and approved last year. But we are looking into that next year. So we're going to kind of use this year as a test run to see how much more we get this year, and then hopefully we'll try to get even more in 2026. And we do have that budgeted into our request.
Okay, and so would it make sense to conclude that you might have to do fewer units if yeah, okay. I don't know if the math makes sense. Okay. I know I'm just going to start this topic. You and I can talk about this later, but we do have a project that would be nice to apply this to retroactively, existing project. So we can talk about that offline, but just to put that idea in your head.
Great, thank you. I think I saw Shannon able to come off mute. If you want to speak now.
Oh, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay. Oh, I just typed it into chat. I'm sorry, you may have heard me typing then. I want to echo the thanks and the gratitude that Carl shared. This has been a tremendous body of work, and this proposal is so exciting to see. Just my 2 cents worth, that I typed in chat is regarding serving lower AMI levels. May I suggest offering an incentive at the time of home sale versus the funding reservation? And just a real life reflection here is that for many of us, the availability of down payment assistance actually has a lot of bearing on how low we can go in our sales, right? So that 40% AMI home buyer, we need to subsidize that purchase somehow. And so just food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. All right, so we'll do Amy and then Dan, and then we'll move on, and maybe we can come back later if we have more time at the end.
I totally agree with Shannon, but Shannon, right? Not Sharon, Shannon, about the incentive. I think that's a great idea because I was also looking at these, and I see that Matt Martino is on the call, so he might want to type something in the chat. But I don't feel like, as a general rule, and we all know that all loans are different, that a 10,000 bumps application amount for 20% lower AMI.
Great, thank you. Dan.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the last meeting, I was in the project we are right now working on in the ORCA process, but we would, if this were in place a year ago, we would probably, use this. That request for 52 units is 9.2 million. So just to put that in perspective, I understand you have 40 million, right? So we'd probably be idealistic to think that we could get almost 1/4 of that. So hopeful that in 2026 that can be increased dramatically. And that might imply shifting some of the rental funds into home ownership, but I'm a big believer in the value of home ownership. That it adds to the project is just huge. I had a specific question though about the you mentioned there that if 10% profit, that was the max cap. Does that include the developer fee for nonprofits? Is that what you're thinking?
It does.
Yeah, okay.
But it's separate from the general contractor fee. So there's the general contractor fee has its own limit, and then the nonprofit and developer fee would be that would be the limit on this.
Okay, that works. Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your feedback so far. I skipped a slide. Okay, sorry about that. All right. This next piece covers a little less fun of a topic. Since we're using the bonds since we're using the bonds, we have a kind of extra responsibility to be good stewards of those funds and keep them safe in situations like a development falling through or an organization's bankruptcy or dissolution. If we're able to award above the value of the land, then we do need to adjust our policies a little to ensure that we can continue to be good stewards to that bond. Historically, we've managed this by taking a security interest in just the land and, of course, awarding only the value of the land so that it equals out. We're proposing the main change to be, instead of just the land, we would take a security interest in the whole project, so the land and the structure through the construction phase, and then we would release the lien on the structure during mortgage closing and maintain the lien on only the land as we have in the past. If you have a construction lender, this would be a shared first position lien, and our goal is to have a more structured conversation and partnership with your lender than we've had in the past. We'd also shift our appraisal requirements to require the standard appraisal that values your project as built. And we would additionally require that the lift loan plus the construction loan do not exceed the value of that appraisal. Our main discussion question for this is how this plan might impact your organization. So please feel free to share your thoughts now.
Don't think it's a problem for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, this works fine. Looks fine for rooted homes too. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I see a lot of positive feedback in the chat, so I definitely appreciate that. And not seeing any hands raised, I will go ahead and move on to the next topic. I like how quick this one went by. All right. Well, another option that has been recommended to us is to consider an applicant's liquidity with their award. This is something that, again, we know varies significantly from partner to partner, so we wanted to bring this to you all as well. Last year, we began reviewing financials and we looked at whether they had been audited. We looked at current ratio and debt to net asset ratio, and we looked to see that the organization was operating in the green. These were all scoring criteria rather than requirements. There's not a lot to share on my part here, so I'll just jump to the questions. If we look to add liquidity in some way or another, how might you recommend we go about that, considering all the variation in capacity and size of your organizations? If we do specify liquidity, what percentage of the lift loan makes sense for you? And do you have any recommendations to help us keep our evaluation of your organization's financial health equitable?
I mean, you do, and also like involve them and what you do, you know?
So let me try to just process this if I'm understanding this correctly. And I'll use this current project I mentioned, which we would have requested 9.2 million. So if it were 20%, you're suggesting that we would have to have 1.8 million in liquidity and in cash asset. Is that what I'm understanding?
If it was set to 20%, that is, yes, what we've been kind of advised, but we don't have any specific number set. So
yeah, well, I'm just raising that. I'm kind of taking a deep gulp there. If that might be an issue, 5 to 10% might be doable. 20% might be tough.
Okay. Very helpful.
Yeah, I'm curious to sort of what you're trying to accomplish here, and particularly in the context of other ways to backstop your loans, your financial obligation.
Yeah, it's been kind of pitched as this was an idea in response to a question that we had that was, how do we manage our risk for developments that have like very large projects or a large portfolio that take like a really substantial amount of our funds. So I'll use Dan's project as an example. 9.2 million is a quarter of all of the funds that we would have available. So judging liquidity was one of the suggestions that we thought sounded all right, but we haven't really dug into the details yet or really figured out what that looks like.
It just feels like kind of a blunt instrument. There's a lot of other ways to approach the kind of risk management that you're looking for. So, I think, certainly at the higher level could be an issue for some organizations, but I think you could achieve this in a variety of ways, and maybe you've already talked about or thought about those, and so maybe it might be worth putting together that list of what you're trying to accomplish with that liquidity test.
That's helpful, thank you. I see 2 hands, but just really quick in the chat, Adrian asked, how will that promote and or not restrict small and emerging developers? I think that's a great question. And that's something we were hoping to hear from you, because we definitely want any changes we make to be equitable and not like be more unfair to smaller developers. So very good question. And so if you feel that it is extra restrictive to smaller or emerging developers, we appreciate hearing that. Pooja says in the chat, it may help to have liquidity as it relates to the amount of the ask, more liquidity. That's helpful feedback. Thank you. And next I see Emily's hand up.
Thanks, and I'm sorry for being off camera today. I have iffy internet. I think I have no concerns about the first bullet point list. Those debt ratios, current ratios, those are all pretty standard. I share concerns about the liquidity percentage. I think it is going to be inequitable for smaller and emerging nonprofits, but even for a nonprofit the size of Dev Northwest, we oftentimes face multiple funders wanting this type of liquidity reserve for different projects. It's really difficult to come up with this money. It's not very common that we get grant funds where somebody says, please sit on this and don't do work with it that is serving your community. And so it really hamstrings us to try to come up with that kind of capital, especially if we have multiple projects going that need the same sort of reserve. So I would really encourage OHCS to think about either going with the very low end of that or figuring out different ways that we can offer financial assurance. I would also encourage that, maybe those of us who are sort of repeat developers who have a track record of finishing and delivering on LIFT projects over a certain number of years, maybe have some fewer requirements for that type of liquidity because we've proven that we can accomplish the projects and do them. And maybe the first time an organization comes in, there's a little bit of something like this. But again, I think the impact for small, emerging, and grassroots nonprofits is going to be bigger. So I have a lot of qualms about this one in particular.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Just a follow-up question for you, just to clarify for me. Were you saying that the banks require separate liquid assets across your projects? So if you have project 1 and they require 1 million liquidity, and then project 2 requires 1 million liquidity, you'd actually need 2 million liquidity? Is that what you were saying there?
That is sometimes the case, yes.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. And then I see Amy's hand.
I was just curious about the cumulative consideration on this. Is it per LIFT loan? Or is it for all LIFT loans outstanding undeveloped, or?
I think that's a good question for us to think about. It is not included in today's proposal at all.
Okay. I think that makes a big difference, especially, I don't know, Carl, how many developments do you have outstanding right now? 1. And you guys just got a couple of awards this year, right?
Sorry, no, we have, we'll have
3.
We'll have 3 all at once in 2025. And so that liquidity would be so probably the 20% would be roughly $2 or $3 million. So it's a huge number for our organization.
Yeah, and then if we're in a similar boat, so then if we wanted to apply for a new one next year, the cumulative thing is a big question.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Very helpful. Thank you. I see. Oh, sorry, that was some background noise. I see Robin in chat says, have there been bankruptcies or other failures? Would looking at each of those provide some data for dealing with this issue? And I'm really happy to say that we haven't had any bankruptcies or failures across our projects. Everything's still going, which is really awesome to say, and a real testament to all the partners that we work with. But we do still need to prepare for the just in case scenario, especially since these things go 20 to 40 years with different organizations. But thank you for that. And thank you all of our partners too for being so awesome. I will go ahead and move on to the next topic. I appreciate all of your very thoughtful feedback on this one. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and shift focus now and start an early conversation about the NOFA. And if you don't know, that's our Notice of Funding Availability, in which we actually release these LIFT funds. So last year we worked with partners and internally to shift from a competitive NOFA where there's a set application period, everything closes, and applications are scored against one another. And then we moved to a rolling NOFA, which is open most of the year and we award funds on a first come, first served basis to applicants that can meet a minimum threshold. We found that this offered a lot of benefits. We'd like to continue doing a rolling NOFA this year due to those benefits, but we also wanted to include you all in this conversation. If we're able to move forward, like Carl said, if we're able to move forward with these proposed changes, we think this NOFA will be a lot more competitive than in the past, both because we hope to see an increase in applications and excuse me, sorry about that. And because each applicant likely will receive more funding. So essentially we expect to see more applicants, but also that our funds won't be able to serve as many as in the past. So I've listed some pros and cons here on the slide. The competitive NOFA is clear and most fair to applicants of similar size, capacity, etc. It also ensures that we fund the quote unquote best projects each year. The cons are that it's a little inequitable for smaller organizations and those with less experience, both in LIFT and in grant writing in general. Additionally, in this situation, once we publish the NOFA, we can't speak to anyone one-on-one. We can't give advice outside of published public feedback, and we can't offer flexibility to applications that may have misunderstood questions or need a little help making their project fit. The rolling NOFA can be a lot more equitable in scoring for new applicants. We are able to provide one-on-one guidance, and in theory, it provides flexible timing. So you don't have to choose between rushing things or just waiting until next year to apply. However, there is always the risk that funds may run out very quickly, and those who need to apply later won't be able to access the funds. Also, we may miss out on scoring or on supporting the quote unquote better projects that maybe apply later in the year. So before we make our internal decisions on this, we'd love to hear your thoughts on which of these you would prefer and why. And I know Talia has a poll prepared to just kind of get a yes, no rating on these.
Did the poll come up? Can people see it? Yes or no?
Yeah, it came up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But I'm getting this weird message that says something went wrong. Please try again. I tried again. I don't know if you got my vote or not, but there you go.
Thank you. I don't know if everyone can see the results in chat, but it is pretty overwhelmingly rolling NOFA, so that's great. I like when everyone kind of agrees one way or the other. Question in the chat says it would be helpful to know the minimum threshold that would be required. That kind of gets determined during the NOFA. We would publish that later in the year. We did have the minimum threshold this year, and we were able to work with all of the developers. Even some folks maybe didn't meet the minimum threshold right away. We were able to work with them to improve their application or project to get it to work. So that's just kind of how we would manage that. Oh, thanks, Talia. I see your response in the chat too.
I voted for the rolling for sure. I think that's a better approach. I am concerned though about the the ORCA, that you guys, that the home ownership side will end up in the kind of ORCA thing, particularly if you end up with this limited funds where you've got to have this very long lead time. And so I think the issue with competitive for small organizations or organizations that don't have the kind of funding to do pre-development is it's a huge risk, right? And I think the rolling process sort of de-risks it, but the limited funding sort of adds the risk back in. So I think there's a question to me around the supports for doing pre-development work. And I don't know if that's something that's part of your agenda. I know that has been funded in the past. So perhaps there's a combination there that says rolling with some pre-development funds, and then you guys have to come up with a criteria for how you use that.
Yeah, right now we don't have any specific like separate pre-development program. We did have the pre-development and capacity building program with our HDIP program, but we don't have funds for that next year. Hopefully, fingers crossed, 2026, we'll see some more of those funds. We'll watch the legislative session next year, of course. I see a lot of comments in the chat. Amy asked, would there still be set-asides until mid-year? I have a slide a little bit later. The next slide will be on set-asides, so we can talk about that then. Shannon asked, could there be a set period for collecting the first set of submissions, even with a rolling NOFA? That is kind of how we anticipated handling it this year. We weren't planning on competitively scoring everything, but we kind of thought if we received enough applications to utilize all the funds in the first quarter, that we would handle it a little bit different than if we needed to keep going. So that is something that I've been thinking about as well. But we don't have any solid plans on it yet. So thank you for that.
Jessica, Scott has his hand raised.
Yes, sorry about that. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. Jessica, I liked the rolling NOFA this past year. I thought it worked pretty well, especially with the new development timelines of 6 months to close on the loan, a year to go vertical. It gave us flexibility and when it made sense for us to apply. But I worry that if there's a smaller bucket of funds, the rolling NOFA doesn't work as well. It just becomes competitive, and you nix those benefits of the flexibility and timing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, it kind of sounds like most of y'all are in favor of the rolling NOFA, or according to the poll, everyone who voted is in favor of the rolling NOFA. But yeah, there's some concerns that we need to deal with in case all of the funding is expended immediately. So yeah, super helpful. Thank you. All right. So this year we are again proposing some soft set-asides for this NOFA. The map on this slide shows where all of our developments have been located. The top number in each county is the number of projects, and the bottom number in parentheses is the number of units. You can see that these are pretty contained to more urban areas, and we haven't served a lot of folks in East Oregon or along the coast. We're hoping these proposed changes can help fix that, but we want to be able to provide the space and opportunity for possibly new or small partners to access them. So our proposal is here in the table. Essentially, we've maintained our previous set-asides for 50% rural and 50% urban, but we're also setting aside half of each of those categories for small, emerging, and new partners. And then on the rural side, we're also including developments in counties with fewer than 10 lift-supported homes, even if technically the census tract that they're in might be considered urban. So the way that this really works out is a quarter of the funding would go to small, emerging, or new rural partners and counties with fewer than 10 lift-supported homes. A quarter would go to all other rural developments. Then a quarter would go to small, emerging, and new urban partners, and a quarter to all other urban partners. These are soft set-asides, which means that if they don't get used, they would get lumped in together with other set-asides. What this means depends on if we're doing a competitive or rolling NOFA. It sounds like everyone's in favor of the rolling NOFA. So this isn't really a plan, but the way that it could theoretically work in a rolling NOFA would be like the first quarter, we would have all 4 of these categories. And if they didn't get expended, we could roll together the 2 rural categories, and then we just have the 50% rural set aside, or the remainder of that, and then the remainder of the 50% urban set aside. And there's other ways that we could reconfigure this to make it work. But overall, the goal of this was to give space to these potentially newer developers, to the rural developers, especially if we do the rolling NOFA. We don't want the experienced partners to come first and take all of the funding, and then we have all of these cool new opportunities for new folks, and then they don't even have time to get into that. So that's the goal here. The 2 questions that we have for you on this one is if this is an equitable distribution of funds, and if this impacts if or how your organization might apply for funds. I'm sorry, I can go ahead and open it up to feedback now. There's only so many ways I can say, and now I'm handing it over to you all. Sarah asked in chat, for the first set aside, do you mean counties that have 10 or fewer lift-supported homes at the time of application? I would say at the time of releasing the NOFA would be where I'm leaning towards. So even if we get like 3 applications in a county that we've never served before, all 3 of them would count in that category. Sorry, I was reading chat and looking at everything. I see, Dan, you have your hand up.
Well, I don't know if you want to dare to comment on this, but I mean, would you want to give us any advice? You know, as I struggle with this and looking at the dollar amounts, I'm just thinking it's probably not wise for us to withdraw from the ORCA process and to switch to the LIFT HO process, given the amount of funding available for a $9.2 million ask. I mean, am I off base on that, or do you think we should go for it?
I think that is up to you. I don't think I can give advice to pull out of one of our programs for the other one. I don't think I have the authorization to do that. But I did actually want to ask you, because I was thinking of your feedback that you gave us at the other meeting that we were in. And I was wondering, is your organization or is your development, do you know if it fits into the rural or the urban?
Well, the current project is urban. I believe Springfield is also urban, correct? But
I don't know, the new map's a little weird. I can't actually guess which one's rural or not.
We do have a project that we're in our pipeline in Springfield, but after that, we have a project in Cottage Grove. So that definitely would be rural.
Okay.
But right now, I think the immediate project and the next one after that most likely are urban.
Okay.
So yeah.
So your project would be reliant on the set-asides combining, essentially, or you being the first one through the gate. Which, I mean, that is a valid concern, is that there are going to be applications that need close to or more than $10 million. So that is very helpful feedback as we kind of finalize this. Um, all right, I see Amy's hand.
Yeah, with this last year, I think you guys had about like quarterly due dates or benchmark dates, I would call them more. And when on the rolling, when it's first come, first serve, one of the things that really holds up our show is the appraisal. Sometimes the appraiser is not busy and can get to it very quickly, but with our application we're doing right now, the appraiser was about 2 months out. So when you're like, I'm going to miss my opportunity and it's so competitive, would you guys be willing to entertain like reviewing all the applications you got in during a certain period and then waiting and then reviewing all the applications you got in again by June something and then all the applications by September? So there's a little bit less rush on an element that we don't have a lot of control over.
It is something that we could consider. We do sort of lump them together, and we are, like I said earlier, I am playing with some ideas in my head about how we might handle the first quarter of a rolling NOFA. That is something that we could consider in that. Oh, for the appraisal, Amy, would you see our conversion to accepting like a regular as-built appraisal that you get for any construction lender as opposed to our weird specific appraisal that we've required in the past? Do you see that expediting your process or speeding things up, or is it just you're reliant on when the appraiser has availability and that's what's causing issues?
For us, it's primarily been our reliance on when the appraiser has availability. Let me clarify with you though, when you say as-built, are you saying as-built of the land with infrastructure being build ready, or are you saying as-built on the home? Since I guess you're putting something, a position on the structure under construction, but are you looking for value on that too?
Yeah, we would want to see the appraisal, just the same one that you'd give to your lender that gives you a value for your whole finished project.
Gotcha. I think that I anticipated an appraisal with including the buildings being more expensive and taking more time.
That's actually helpful. Thank you. That's not something that we'd thought of before. All right. I see Carl's hand, then I'll go through the chat and answer some of the questions I see coming in there.
One question comment. Do you have definitions for quote small, quote emerging, quote new?
So we have those definitions from this NOFA. We will likely bring those over into our more solid NOFA engagement once we get this finalized. I don't have those immediately on hand. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I definitely should have done that.
Yeah, a little bit of devil in the details there. The other piece, I think you said at the outset that there was maybe some desire to have partnering with more experienced organizations and less experienced organizations. If that's true, then just curious how this might work if you had a sponsor organization in a rural community that's never done it, but you had a partner who has done it before. I don't know if you've thought about that.
I think that was an idea that was discussed during the working group. We haven't been able to put anything together regarding that yet. So I wouldn't have an answer for you directly there. I think it depends on the situation, who the sponsoring, I guess leaving out like that actual official sponsorship. I do know that there are smaller partners who will partner with larger partners to kind of work together on things. And I think that has at least in this NOFA, kind of depended on the situation, how we handled that, like what the relationship between the two organizations are, who's going to be doing the different kinds of work. I know like Talia and I have sat down with a couple of applications this year to really like, how do we treat each of these organizations on the existing rural, emerging, small, and committed to equity section that we had. So it'll be further conversation to get that figured out.
Yeah, I think that also shifts back to that liquidity conversation we had a few minutes ago too.
Definitely. Well, thanks you. Talia just put the definitions in the chat. Okay. Sorry, I'm scrolling back up in the chat and trying to catch up a little bit. Dustin asks, at what point in time would you release the soft set aside? I think we'll have a more formal proposal at one of our later engagement meetings, but this year, the way we handled it was we had a set aside for rural, emerging, small, and committed to equity organizations. We called them RESC. And that set aside existed for 6 months. And then after 6 months, we just combined all of the funds together. As we kind of figure out how this first quarter will look, if we anticipate everything being gone very quickly, if it's not, we'll need to kind of rethink how we do that this year, I think. But look forward to a more specific proposal on that a little bit later. Adrian says, I think the set-asides direct and encourages developments in the target areas. The equity of the set-aside recommended seems appropriate to start with for the first quarter. Thanks, Adrian. Pooja says, I worry if this will be restrictive, if indeed there are 4 projects of 10 million each, since there is no upper limit for the ask, or is 10 million the upper limit? I think that's a good question. I don't think we have really solid ideas of how we would handle something over 10 million. If we had, say, an $11 million ask in the small, emerging, or new urban partner development, I think we would take 10 million from that and then 1 million from the all other urban section. If it was an 11 million ask in the all other urban partner section, I don't know how we would handle that ask. So that's something for us to think through for our specific plan. Amber says that she is happy to see the encouragement. She's in one of those counties where there are 0 current units listed. Thank you, Amber. We're really hopeful to get something in those counties because it's really one of our goals to really expand across Oregon. We've been kind of stuck in the I-5 corridor for a while, so I-5 and Bend, lots of stuff in the Bend area too.
Jessica, I'm just having an aha moment, and I'm wondering if we don't need to support an ask with an appraisal value. Can we submit the appraisal as part of the funding requirements after the award again?
That is a good question. And
that would be beneficial. I mean, because in addition to that stuff that, the appraiser's timeline, in order for the appraiser to appraise something, we have to give them, civil drawings that are at least far enough down the road that they can do an appraisal. So there's a time thing there, depending on how available your civil engineer is and how big the project is and all that kind of stuff. I would be happy to go back to support or submitting it afterwards.
Thank you for that idea, Amy.
Yep.
Yeah. Amber mentions that we need some set aside for small projects specifically. We actually do have something to talk about small projects a little bit later, so I'll hold on to your question until then. And then Sarah asks, has there been any consideration of a fast track for current LIFT awardees that might submit applications for a phase 2 of the same project or development? We haven't considered that yet, but I think this next page has maybe a similar proposal for you, and I'd love to hear more about this, maybe on that next on the next topic as well. Scott says this proposal appears to favor small and emerging organizations over more established ones with greater capacity. How do you determine the balance between prioritizing smaller organizations and those with greater capacity? I think that's a great question. And that is why we have brought this to you to ask if the numbers look right. We have already received some feedback, and someone can step in and disagree with this feedback that we've received. We haven't officially incorporated it into the numbers yet, but we have received feedback that they don't think that there will be 10 million worth of applications for small, emerging, or new rural partners in counties. So we've heard one feedback that that amount is probably too big and should be kind of redistributed. Happy to hear if someone disagrees with that feedback. And yeah, so that's part of our hope here in our conversation with you is if you feel your section doesn't have enough funding and another section should get more. And then I also just want to reiterate that this is a soft set aside. So if we don't have a lot of small, emerging, or new urban partners, or if they all have very small projects, the rest of that funding will move into the groups for everyone else. I see, Lucinda, I see your comment. Thank you for that. And then yeah, Shannon, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. I really love the small, emerging, or new rural set aside. I love that it's a soft set aside because we don't know, right? We don't know. But especially with the per home funding being determined by the as-built appraisal for the first time, we hope, versus the land valuation, I think that we're in this moment of really not understanding what the untapped potential is around the state, right? So it gives us a chance to help sort of find it by having this soft set aside, which makes me feel better about the rolling NOFA process personally. And just the other thing I will say is that for future years, as has been flagged by others already, having some pre-development funding is going to help make sure that we have a steady stream of this type of emerging project. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. We're definitely not trying to kind of prioritize new developers over our longstanding partners who we've had great relationships over time. We definitely want to make sure that you all continue to feel supported by us. But I similarly agree with Shannon is that we're like opening the mystery door and we don't know or we're possibly opening the mystery door and we have no idea what's behind it. So we want to make sure that we leave space for what's there, or, to at least serve a good portion of what's there. So yeah, we'll see what's behind door number 1, and hopefully we'll get some new partners, and hopefully we'll be able to support everyone who's been a great partner so far. Okay. Amber says in chat, what if large capacity organizations get a bonus if they train a new emerging organization to build capacity during their project? I think that's a really interesting idea. I don't think that's something that can be supported by Lyft just because we have those specific requirements for what Lyft is allowed to support. But it is something that we can think about as we design our different programs moving forward. All right, so we've got about half an hour, I guess 23 minutes left in our meeting, and we only have one conversation topic left. So I'll go ahead and move on over there just to make sure that we cover everything that we need to cover today, and then we can leave some open space at the end just for more general comments if we need to. All right. So our last slide here is, or our last discussion topic here. After this most recent NOFA, we realized that it felt a little weird to require this full massive application to partners just building 1 or 2 homes. And we don't have a really solid plan here. It's just an idea, but we'd like to provide a shorter, kind of simpler version of the application for small projects. The goal would be a lower workload and threshold for these much lower risk projects so that we can be more welcoming and accessible to those smaller, newer, and rural developers. What this would likely entail is cutting out some questions or requirements and adjusting the scoring criteria just in relation to those changes that we made to the questions. And that's about as much thought as we've put into this idea so far. We wanted to pitch this kind of larger idea to you first to make sure that you all found it equitable and fair for everyone before we dove into the specific questions. I think it's more fair. We were kind of stuck because we didn't know competitive NOFA or rolling NOFA. It's probably a little more fair and equitable in the rolling NOFA than the competitive NOFA. But anyway, our questions to you on this one are, do you have any concerns about the idea? Do you have suggestions for what the right number is to consider a project small? And are there any parts of the application or documents or process that you think would be worthwhile to cut? Or if you're a small organization who has applied and found anything particularly challenging, what was it? And I see Dan's hand up. Oh, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
I should know better by now. I was saying by size, maybe just using a dollar amount, any project under $1 million. I mean, our smallest co-op that we have done was a 6-unit co-op, which was a single house divided into a quad and an ADU that's a duplex. So we got six households on a standard size family lot. And I would consider that a small development. And certainly, yeah, any kind of abbreviated process for something that small would be greatly appreciated.
Great, thank you. I see Scott's hand.
Jessica, I have a suggestion that's kind of adjacent to this, is that I would love to see the ability to create an organizational profile in Procorum, so that info about our organization that is common to multiple applications doesn't need to be uploaded every time we have a project. So that similar info to our organization, it would streamline things a lot. I couldn't tell you how many times I've uploaded insurance certificates and other things that are common across multiple projects.
That's really helpful. I don't think Procorum has that capability specifically, but it is something that we can talk about for our own internal processes.
Scott had a great solution, and I don't know, I wasn't coming with a solution, but I was going to say that the gathering of documents is one of the most tedious parts, in my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah, Carl.
This is one of my pet peeves about working with OHCS is the application. I have many suggestions about the application. I'd love to work with you guys on it. One I'd like to share, and I'll just keep repeating, is I would love it if the math were a template and not locked. I find the formulas are just miserable and cause all sorts of wasted time and consternation. So if there's a way to do that, related to that, I do this all the time. I have a decoder ring to get from your categories of costs to actual CSI cost divisions. So I'd love for you guys to rethink those cost categories that you use.
Thank you. And I will say, Carl and anyone else on the call who applied this year, I know I haven't yet submitted or sent you the invites, but in a few weeks, I have scheduled a meeting for if you're available for us all to kind of get together and you all can tell me everything you hate about the application, but in a more structured way. And then, of course, we're willing to take one-on-ones on that too. But the goal on that is this year, we're definitely striving to make our project or our program more welcoming and a little more accessible. And I know we will still have really annoying and complicated requirements, like a lot of the documents are non-negotiable and the pro forma is non-negotiable. But yeah, we're gonna try to make things a little bit more accessible for folks. And Shannon.
Yeah, thank you. I think it won't be too surprising that I love this idea, and something I just like to flag. And also just thank you for having this conversation at this time, right? So some rural organizations for whom it wouldn't have penciled in the past to apply for a lift are going to need to absorb some costs to get ready to apply, right? Because they're not going to have that as-built appraisal. They might not even have their plans that far along, right? Because we didn't know this was a thing for sure. So they're going to have to invest to get ready to apply. It's just a different, I don't want to say burdensome because it's a huge opportunity, but if that makes sense, it's like sort of a differential front-loaded cost for smaller organizations. So to have a process that is maybe then less burdensome once you get into it, that does seem equitable to me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. And then, yeah, just to clarify though, these aren't for sure and ready to go. So I'm definitely not going to advocate on moving and pushing costs happening right now, because right now these are still these are the ideas that we're hopeful will move forward, but we can't yet commit to you that this is what's going to happen. Oh.
I don't see any hands up, so I'll say something if that's all right.
Sure.
Site review checklist. That is incredibly monotonous, and I don't understand why it's there. Besides for, it's fun to see how far up the nearest park is and that kind of stuff. But a lot of it is just, I don't know if it's required that has to be there, but it just feels like a lot of work and a lot of useless information, in my opinion. Especially, I mean, I'm fine with doing it, Jessica. Like for the young ones that have only like 2 or 3 homes, yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Okay, checking the chat. Sarah says in chat, on a similar note, a detailed pro forma development training for potential applicants by OHCS would be wonderful. That's really great to point out. In the survey that I'll have a link for you soon, we actually specifically have a question that asks what kind of training would you find beneficial, and the pro forma is one of the items on that list. And we, definitely noticed some issues with the pro forma this year too. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to look into and try to make a little more accessible. We still have to have it, but we'll see what updates we can make. Robin asks in chat, you mentioned pre-dev. Will there be some? Unfortunately, no, we don't have the funding to support pre-development, our pre-development and capacity building program this year. We do fund that with general funds, and the legislature didn't award us those funds this year, but we are asking for them during next year's legislative session. So we'll see about 2026 moving forward. That being said, the LIFT funds, the LIFT award can be applied retroactively to pre-development costs for a certain time frame. I don't have that number in front of me, but yeah, we don't have any upfront pre-development funding, but you can retroactively apply them. Jeremy says shared risk for those pre-development items would be welcome. And thank you for that feedback. Just the same limits that I said for Robin. Well, Parker asks Shannon, what type of support would help from the county level for smaller or rural organizations? And I'm happy to echo that question to you, Shannon.
Oh, thanks. We're chatting on the side. I wasn't sure if everyone can see all of that. So the Habitat affiliate, Sonoma County, has land in Bay City that they're working to pre-development, and it sounds like he's yeah, that would be amazing. So really excited to make this connection today. Thank you.
Sorry for airing your public or your private conversation to everyone. Robin asks, when do you anticipate this NOFA being released? And we're hopeful for January of next year will be the launch, so long as everything works out.
Jessica, I think we're up to date on answering questions in the chat. So
oh,
you want to go to the next?
Talia.
Yeah, sorry.
Talia just handled it all for me. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Well, this is really good timing. So I will just move on to the closing here. So just a quick reminder, I wanted to share that there are going to be a lot more opportunities to provide feedback. We have a survey available online that covers most of what we've presented here. And Talia is going to share the link in chat. It also includes a few additional items like the potential training opportunities that I mentioned. It is a little long, so we'd be very grateful if you could take some time and fill out as many of the questions as you're interested in, or that you find time to do so. All of the questions are optional, so if you need to skip something, we'd really prefer you answer anything that you can and submit rather than everything. So anything that you can would be super helpful for us. Additionally, if you have any specific feedback, you're welcome to email us at our general ho.development email address. And Talia, if you could put that in the chat as well, please. I'm the one that monitors that inbox, so you're basically emailing me, but it helps me keep things separated and organized when topics like this come into this email inbox rather than mine. There are also a lot more engagement opportunities coming up. The long list is here. We can mark today's session off the list. On September 4th, we're holding office hours. If there have been any big determinations or changes, we'll let you know then. But it's really close, so we might not have anything new to give you. This will be more of a session for us to listen to you and take any general feedback that you'd like to provide. On September 16th, I'll be hosting that session with everyone who applied for the NOFA this year, just to talk through how the application worked. It is invite only, and I'm sorry you haven't gotten your invites yet, but I'm going to send them out literally right after this meeting, so look for them today. And let's see, we'll be presenting the updates, incorporating some of your feedback in person at the Housing Oregon Conference. It'll be either September 24th or 25th. I don't think we have the schedule yet. And we'll also have a few partners join us to talk about their work. Starting in October, we'll hopefully have finalized the LIFT plan, and we'll get the chance to really dive into the details with you. So we'll present and speak with you on the updated LIFT manual, incorporating the new program changes if they get incorporated. We'll have a rough plan for the 2024 NOFA to present to you for your feedback, and we'll be developing a partner guidebook to incorporate some policies and guidance so that you all have really easy access to it. Our engagement sessions will end with the Homeownership Development Partner Call on October 22nd, and that will be our final presentation and the last call for feedback. Excuse me. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us today, for your time and your thoughts, and we're so grateful to have partners who care about our program and work hard to make it work for them and for all Oregonians across the state. We'll stick around for a little bit if anyone has any additional feedback that you'd like to provide now. Otherwise, please take the survey. We really appreciate everything you have to share, and please have a great rest of your day and a great week.